Today, my guest and I discuss 3 historical topics that you can use in your tabletop RPG campaigns.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Hey guys, my name is Matt and welcome to my show. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and better storytellers by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. And today's episode is no exception. My guest and I break down 3 actual historical events and we kind of tease out the different ways that you can use those in your RPG campaigns. So let's dive in. My guest today is the writer behind the Emmy Award-nominated Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
No problem. Thank you for coming back on. We had you on in episode 5, where we discussed using history, actual history in your role-playing games. And so today we are going to dive into several topics that people can use in their role-playing game campaigns. But first, you have a new adventure going on, don't you?
Yeah, so I'm broadening the Molten Sulfur blog out into a podcast as well. So if you, the listener to this very podcast, are a person who listens to podcasts, you can get the same content that I put out on the Molten Sulfur blog now in podcast form. Head over to moltensulfur.com for the link. And it's one 5 to 10 minute episode every week on some historical topic and how historical or folkloric. And how to use that at your gaming table, how to tie that in, how to bring in the themes and ideas and really bring your game to life, like we talked about back in episode 5.
I will provide a link to your podcast and to your blog in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. As I mentioned, Tristan and I are going to dive into a few historical topics and kind of explore those to see how we can use those in our tabletop role-playing games. So the first topic we wanted to tackle here today is the Secret Basque Fishing Grounds. So Tristan, can you kind of give us the rundown of that?
Sure. So this is a lot of fun. First, some definitions. The Basques are an insular people from the Pyrenees, the mountain range between Spain and France. And the Basques have been living in the Pyrenees, particularly in the Western Pyrenees and the areas around, for as far back as we have records. And during the Middle Ages, the Basques did a lot of fishing in the Bay of Biscay, that kind of crook formed by the northern coast of Spain and the western coast of France. And the Basques were bringing in huge quantities of codfish and whale meat, which they dried and shipped throughout Europe. Now, this is important because this is the Middle Ages. The Catholic Church is hugely powerful and influential. And the Catholic Church had restrictions on the consumption of meat. You couldn't eat meat on Fridays. You couldn't eat meat during the 40 days of Lent. You couldn't eat meat you couldn't eat meat on Saints' days. And boy, there were a lot of Saints' days. But on these days, you could eat fish. Fish was totally legit. But if you live far from the ocean, you may just be out of luck for getting protein on these days, except for all of this cod and this whale meat that the Basques were bringing in. Whale meat was considered fish, and so good to go. And salted dried cod and salted dried whale meat were just being shipped all over Europe from these Basque sources, and people were eating it, and the Basques were growing rich. Here's the problem. They were bringing in way more cod and whale than they could conceivably be fishing out of the Bay of Biscay. And nobody outside Basque country knew where these guys were getting all of this product that was making them so wealthy. There are plenty of other cod and whale fishing grounds around Europe. But nobody who was fishing in these grounds was reporting seeing Basque ships. So where the heck were they getting it? Some fishermen out of Brittany in northwestern France even tried following the Basque ships to see where they were going, but no luck. And this then presents us with a wonderful opportunity for a gaming adventure. Obviously, it is unlikely that your game is set in, let's say, 12th century Western Europe, though if it is, that sounds awesome. Like, drop me a line. So you wouldn't necessarily want to use this in literal form, but rather, look, there's probably somewhere in your fictional campaign setting where people could be bringing in huge quantities of, doesn't even have to be cod and whale. It could be something particular to your setting. Maybe you're playing in Dark Sun, a blasted, blighted desert hellscape, and people are bringing in large quantities of vegetables, and nobody knows where they're getting them because they sure don't seem to be growing them in their own backyards. And you tried following the caravans out to where they're getting the vegetables, and no dice. So where the heck is this coming from? And at your gaming table, your PCs could treat this as an adventure hook, right? Infiltrating one of these fishing expeditions, being like, oh yeah, we're totally Basque. Look at us. We're speaking Basque because we learned the language or whatever. And sailing with these fleets out to see where on earth they're getting all of this really valuable product. In real life, there's some decent circumstantial evidence that the Basques were fishing the Grand Banks and the Georges Bank off the North American eastern seaboard, kind of Massachusetts through Newfoundland off there. But no hard evidence because the Basques didn't write this down. They didn't tell anybody. Like, we will probably just never know for certain where the Basques were going. And yeah, this whole like infiltrate a ship, infiltrate a crew, ride out there is kind of a fun opportunity for a spy or espionage or infiltration type adventure that's probably going to feel super different from anything your players have ever experienced before.
Yeah, it seems like there would be some opportunities for, say, like a rival kingdom or something to want to like sponsor parties to try to find out exactly where the fishing grounds are. It seems like there's opportunities them to infiltrate or to even follow the fleets.
Following the fleets, I think, would probably wind up being a little less fun at the table because there's less opportunities for role play.
Sure.
But I totally dig making this a political thing where you're sponsored by a foreign power and there's political complications and consequences to the PC's actions. I think that lends it a really awesome flavor.
So if the parties then try to infiltrate, so I guess you mentioned a couple of the complications with, since the Basques were such a set apart people and had their unique language and unique culture, there would be obstacles for the characters to pose as them.
Absolutely. So Basque remains a separate standalone language to this day, and the Basques have retained a kind of cultural separation. In an increasingly homogenous Europe, the Basques are working very hard to retain their Basque identity. Hundreds of books in the Basque language are still published every year. Basque poets and songwriters are continuing to compose in Basque, this isn't just translation from other languages. And this then presents cultural and linguistic obstacles. One thing that I suggest in my blog post on the subject is hiding behind your GM screen a short list of common words that you sort of arbitrarily select that are hard to pronounce in the language that your Basque analogs speak. So words like rain or climb or house. And your players don't necessarily know what the words are, but if they say one of those words in character, they have mispronounced the word in a way that kind of perks up everybody's ears on board the ship. Like, hey, wait a minute, that guy mispronounced this common Basque word in a way that makes me suspect he may not be Basque. What's going on over here? And of course, if things go south, if things turn sour, you are a long, long way from help. And if you are dumped overboard, no one will ever find your body, which kind of lends it some high stakes. And it then incentivizes players to kind of keep a mental log of what words they have and have not said in character over the course of the adventure. Just try to keep using the same words. If you know that a word like fast is okay, maybe you just keep saying fast instead of saying quick or rapid or speedy, because you know fast is safe. If any of your characters are particularly academic or linguistically focused, you can let them make a roll to guess at what some of the words on the list might be. But the idea is to kind of raise the stakes in the role play and maybe gamify it a little bit in a way that would be unique. You wouldn't want to do this in every adventure. You'd probably just want to do it in one. I feel like if done repeatedly, it would wear out its welcome. But for one adventure, I think it would be memorable and interesting and fun.
Kind of continuing with your example, if the players are on this other ship and they've successfully at least fooled the crew for a little bit, what are some other things then that they would have to kind of encounter along the way? Would they be trying to like sneak around and make copies of charts, or trying to take star measurements and stuff, even though they are just like the lowly cabin boy? Or
absolutely, throwing an element of stealth in there could be super fun. Of course, if this is a fantasy game or a science fiction game, having the ship be attacked by sea monsters or space whales or whatever, the characters gotta jump to and fight to save the ship is always a good time. Nobody ever walks away from a fight with the sea monsters like, oh geez, I didn't have fun. Like, everybody likes fighting sea monsters. Infiltration, making friends, kind of figuring out like, hey, that guy's the ship's master. He does all the navigation. I'm going to befriend that guy. I'm going to make him like me in the hopes that maybe he drops something in conversation that he didn't mean to, that reveals, hey, we're going to be fishing at this location, but I am aware that, these other locations are also fished and are also profitable. That also might be a good time.
I can just see another concept too, that some players would perhaps think that it would be easier just to find maybe an old sea captain and get him drunk and try to get him to reveal the location that way.
Dude, if that's what your players want, like, roll with it, right? I am never going to complain about players looking at the GM and saying, yeah, I know you plan for us to handle this problem in way A, but we're going to do it in way B. Like, that's players investing in your game, right? That's something that's frustrating in the short term, but in the long term really builds your players' trust in you as the GM, and makes the campaign something that they have a personal stake in, and kind of yields long-term awesome campaigns. The sort of thing where everybody's disappointed when it finally comes to a close. That's the ideal.
And now you mentioned a science fiction game. I guess the concept, if somebody's playing, in space when they're traveling with spaceships, I guess you could take the concept and make it perhaps a secret asteroid mine or something, or some other kind of concept like that.
Yeah, or, hey, this nebula produces a kind of plasma that's found nowhere else in the galaxy and is super valuable, but nobody knows where these guys are getting this incredibly important plasma. You can absolutely do it something like that. There is no reason whatsoever that you have to restrict yourself to fish.
I think the concept is kind of interesting because you can take it in a number of different ways. You can take it as freelance adventurers who are trying to look to make a score. You can take it as political enemies trying to find that secret hidden resource and hiring or sponsoring parties. So I think there's just a number of ways that you can take kind of that secret hidden resource idea.
Plus, you can use the idea offensively, right? You can treat it not as a way to get money, but rather as a way to kind of go on the attack. Because once European explorers discovered the Grand Banks and the Georges Bank and these other prime cod and whale grounds off northeastern North America, the Basques were certainly present in the area before more traditional European explorers were. It's just not clear that necessarily the Basques discovered America before Columbus or what have you. But once that happened, the Basques lost their monopoly. And this source of endless wealth, it didn't dry up. It's not like people are going to stop buying cod, though the declining power of the Catholic Church makes it less valuable, blah, 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 blah. But now you have competition in. You can't just charge whatever prices you feel like for cod. So if your PCs for some reason are trying to go against the Basques, I would definitely not encourage you to do this in a real life setting, like the Basques' biggest enemies in recent historical memory were the fascist dictator Francisco Franco, and I don't think anybody wants to play on the same side as noted fascist dictator Francisco Franco. But in your fictional setting, with your fictional whatever, if these fictional people have been bad, it is a something that your players can do to go on the offensive against that group.
And I'm also just thinking, too, though, we've been talking where the players try to find out the hidden source. What if the players' country, organization, guild, whatever, what if they possess the monopoly and they're trying to keep people out of it?
Absolutely.
That'd be gameable, yeah.
We suspect that there is a spy somewhere in this flotilla. We need you guys to be spy hunters. And, over the course of the fishing expedition, the characters kind of hop between ships a few times, maybe throw in a couple red herrings. I would advise against throwing in intentional red herrings. I find that players usually kind of generate their own red herrings. You didn't intend that anybody actually would seize on this particular sailor that you just created on the spot, but all of a sudden they're convinced that this guy's the real spy. So you want those red herrings, but let the players generate them on their own. They'll get around to it. Don't worry. But yeah, kind of jumping around, looking for spies, who's acting strangely, who's using strange pronunciation. That is totally gameable.
Your point about the players kind of finding their own red herrings is very apt, because they seem to do that all the time. And in my book that I recently published, the No Prep Game Master, I advise the game master just to run with those situations and let the players kind of go down those paths, and then reveal later that the person was just simply the innkeeper and had no other ulterior motives other than selling ale and warm beds to travelers or whatever.
Yeah. I used to generate red herrings for my mystery adventures. I don't bother anymore. It is actively counterproductive. There will be enough red herrings as it is without you adding other intentional ones.
Yeah. Usually I find all you have to do is say something like, if you're describing some scene and you say, oh, there's a woman over there and she wears a green cloak. And then, and you were just thinking that was just some kind of detail to make the description better. Your players are like, oh, I wonder if that means she's a part of a secret society that wear green cloaks.
Yeah, sure, man. Whatever. Like, let's spend the next 3 hours investigating the secret society. And once we're about halfway through investigating it, I'll decide on this side of the screen whether it actually exists. Like, accidentally, you stumbled into the secret society that I didn't have prepped, but it seems like so much fun. Sure, absolutely. The green cloaks, they're renowned.
Yeah, players give the game master so much material. I think it's fascinating sometimes what they say.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so we kind of covered the Basque Secret Fishing Grounds, unless there was anything else you wanted to add about, unless there was some kind of hook or anything, other obstacles or anything we missed on that topic.
No, I think I'm ready to move on to our next topic.
All right, sounds good. We have decided to talk about the wreck of the Ma'adin Ijafen. Can you explain what in the heck that is?
Sure. So first off, apologies for our pronunciation.
Yes.
Neither of us speak Arabic, let alone Mauritanian Arabic, and we're working entirely from written sources. So our pronunciation is almost definitionally going to be wrong.
Sure.
So just big old asterisk there. The Ma'adin Ijafen was and presumably still is, a caravan wreck. So if you think of a shipwreck, right, like the ship founders, the ship is lost, all of its cargo goes to the bottom of the ocean. You can do the same thing with a caravan in a desert. And this particular caravan wreck is in eastern Mauritania, Mauritania being a country on the west coast of Africa, kind of just west of Mali. It's a Saharan and Sahel kind of country. And this caravan was wrecked sometime between the 11th and the 13th centuries, and was probably pretty quickly buried by the sands. But the sands move in the Sahara, in the parts of the Sahara that are a sandy desert. Most of the Sahara is a rocky desert, but this is in a sandy desert section. And a Mauritanian antelope hunter kind of stumbled upon it, talked about like, hey, I found this weird thing out there in the desert. And this French scholar heard about it, and he said, antelope hunter, I would like to, why don't you come with me? Let's go investigate. They brought a couple of Mauritanian soldiers with them for protection from bandits. And they got some camels, one camel for each rider, one to carry the water and one to bring back any artifacts. And then they went out 10 days out into the desert and then 10 days back across these featureless dunes with only just enough water, because rule of thumb, the more water you carry, the more water you need, because water is heavy. So they were carrying just enough water for what they needed. They finally get to the caravan wreck. It's this little hillock, less than a meter tall. And then protruding from the top of it are these brass ingots that were pretty clearly placed there intentionally, perhaps to mark the location. And then beneath the sand and atop the sand, there are these spread of cowries. A cowrie is a shell, in this case, the shell of the sea snail Monetaria moneta, which for a long time was used as currency across much of medieval Africa and the Indian Ocean. And so you have these cowries from burst sacks kind of spread out across the sand. You have these brass ingots that have been wrapped in cloth. It's the dating of the cloth is how we have a general sense of when this wreck occurred. And they only had a few hours to dig up what they could, find whatever artifacts they could, load them on the camels, and get the heck out of there, because doing heavy labor, digging, excavating under the hot Saharan sun uses a lot of water. You have a very limited amount of water. They dig it up, they get the heck back. It's really unclear what happened here. This seems to have been cargo from 5 or 6 camels, just by the amount. It is possible that these that the cargo was unloaded from camels on a merchant convoy, and then the camels broke loose in the middle of the night and ran off. And so the merchants just said, well, okay, I guess we'll bury it. We'll stick some ingots in the top of the pile to mark it in case we're able to come back. And it just never got recovered. That's possible. It's also possible, like any normal shipwreck, that's the result of accident or disaster. It could be bandit booty. Maybe bandits seized this and buried their bandit loot, and then just never came back for it. But we will never know. Not least because after this expedition, the Ma'adin Ijafen has never been found again. The sands shifted again, and it is lost. They were not able to excavate all the artifacts. We don't know necessarily what else is down there, and it is unlikely that this trove will ever be found again. It's to call it a needle in a haystack, I think is an insult to both needles and haystacks. Like, this is an incredibly lucky find. For me, what's really cool about the wreck of the Ma'adin Ijafen from a gaming context is that it is a whole new kind of lost treasure. Right? We all love looking for lost treasure in ancient ruins. We all love looking for lost treasure here and there and everywhere. But before reading about the Ma'adin Ijafen, it had never occurred to me, hey, lost treasure from a caravan wreck. So there's a bunch of ways that your PCs could hear about this lost treasure. An antelope hunter could stumble upon it and tell the PCs. A merchant could come in and say, some of my camels ran off, and I don't think I'm ever going to be able to recover that treasure. It's out there somewhere. Good luck, everybody. Ditto with bandits. The bandits could, if bandits seized it, if it's bandit treasure, the bandits could have started fighting amongst themselves. Like, one badly wounded bandit makes it back to town. He's the last of the bandit. It's like, oh, my treasure's out there somewhere, and dies. But then you have kind of a pretty standard search for lost treasure. It's even buried treasure scenario, but one that's very different from what your players may be accustomed to. And then you have all of the difficulties of traveling through the desert to search for this. The desert is a place that is actively inimical to human life, so it is not easy to just go riding through the desert and hope you stumble upon something. There's bandits out there. I talked somewhat in the post about this, about the experiences of the 14th century Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta when he rode with a caravan south through what is today Mauritania, south through the Sahara. And some of the difficulties that he stumbled across, including people getting separated from the caravan, just never being found again. The caravan guards that his party had to hire, the caravan guards were from a local Berber tribe, and there was a very clear racket, a pretty explicit racket, which is, look, you can pay us to be your guards and we will guard you. Or you can just take your chances. But we live out there in the dunes. And if we stumble across your caravan, and we're using the same wells and oases that you will have to use, if we stumble across your caravan and you haven't hired our tribe to serve as your guards, hey man, you're fair game. Good luck. And so his caravan, Ibn Battuta's caravan, had to hire these guards. And then even once hired, you would have to, the guards were of questionable loyalty. And I think it could be super fun in a we're going to go look for the buried treasure somewhere out there in the desert scenario, for you to have to hire local guards for fear that otherwise you will stumble across them in a different professional capacity. But then once you get to the treasure and the guards are like, oh, that's what we're after, huh? We're taking a 20% cut. You don't like it? That's cool. We'll just consider our contract terminated, and we'll just treat this scenario as if we had stumbled across you, out and about in our territory. Are you going to be willing to take the time to haggle and negotiate when you only have so much water before you need to get the heck out of this desert? What's more important, the size of the cut versus getting out of here safely? Having kind of the surprise, high-stakes role-play encounter once you reach the treasure, I think could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the concept does just put just enough of a twist on go find lost treasure to make it kind of interesting, again, or make it a little fresh again if you're been running a party through some dungeons or something like that, or if you've done some campaigns where you kind of just had kind of a standard dungeon or lost ruins. Also, you've been talking about bandits and things. I guess one of the other obstacles is you could play the desert dangers, right? As in thirst and hunger prominently in this adventure.
Yeah, you absolutely can. To me, that falls in the category of know your players. Some players really get into that. Your bean counter type players. Yeah. If you have somebody in your party who actively keeps track of how many crossbow bolts he has in his pack, that guy's probably going to enjoy that sort of thing. Like, all right, Jim, like how many days of water do we have? If you have someone like that in your party, then keeping track of how much water you have, how much food you have, could be a lot of fun. I would say if you don't have somebody like that in your party, probably better just to hand wave it, because a lot of players don't enjoy content like that. But yeah, know your group.
You could change the terrain as well, as long as it's difficult to find, right? I mean, it could be a jungle, it could be a mountain range or something like that as well.
Absolutely. If you've been doing a lot of deserts in your campaign so far, man, don't throw another desert at your players. They're bored of that. Like, throw them into, a salt flat instead. I guess that's technically also a desert, so maybe a bad example. Have the Lost Caravan be in Antarctica, right? That's going to be also technically a desert. Maybe I'm not very good at this at the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a jungle would be another one, right? A rainforest, perhaps, or something like that.
Your suggestion was definitely the best one. I was trying not to repeat you, and maybe I should have just done that.
Also, just thinking, I mean, of course, this very easily works in a fantasy campaign because there they would just have to have merchant caravans. That would just be how any type of city in a fantasy campaign would get their goods. But in a science fiction campaign, where the players have a ship and they're traveling from planet to planet, I guess the lost caravan, in quotations, maybe a lost freighter or something like that, has wrecked on a distant planet or something like that.
Absolutely. And then, now that we're in science fiction and it's crashed on a desert planet, you can go wild with whatever kind of terrain you want. You can get really crazy. Mm-hmm. I wrote a post a few months back that I would encourage people to check out on the Danakil Depression in Ethiopia, which is a desert, all right, but it's this wild volcanic hot springs, salt flat, crazy colored nutso terrain that could be a lot of fun. And throw crazy monsters at your party. Like, heck yeah, double down on that. Alternately, you could go the kind of the Warhammer 40K trope of the drifting space Hulk.
Yeah.
I love space Hulk type adventures. You're going through the darkened corridors. What's around the next corner? You never know. It's a little bit horror. It's a little bit adventure. It's two great flavors that taste great together.
Yeah. A derelict or a ghost ship kind of thing would be I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
And of course, I guess there's a standard trope, but it could be a complication. It's on the edge of a black hole or something like that, or it's ready to the orbit's ready to decay and it'll fall into a star, so you have to hurry as well. So I guess
you got that time limit to really heighten the tension.
Definitely could go a lot of ways. I think this too is a situation where you could just lift this right up and just throw it into an existing campaign, because players could learn about this caravan in a tavern in a fantasy setting. They can learn about it in a bar in a spaceport. They can learn about it on the street in a market in a fantasy town. They can learn about it from a smuggler in a science fiction campaign. It just seems like it could just be there just to be added into kind of any ongoing campaign.
Yeah. One thing I want to add, if you do wind up going with a desert setting for this, we get our word ghoul from the Arabic word ghoul. Ghouls originally are genies, but they are low-level jinn that eat the flesh of the dead, and so ghouls, your typical undead who are eating the flesh of the dead. Ghouls totally work in a desert setting. That's absolutely where they originate in. If the caravan wreck is the result of accident or misfortune, the ghouls could still be there. If you want to lean a little bit into the jinn side of it, I love jinn. Like, I would recommend that just because jinn are awesome. Don't forget them to give them some kind of low-level magic powers. Common jinn magic powers include invisibility and shape-shifting, especially into snakes. So, lean into that. All
right. Well, I think we talked about this one quite enough. So we have a third historical situation that occurred, and we had decided to talk about the Alesia Gauntlet. Can you describe that for us?
Okay. So first, some backstory here. The Battle of Alesia occurred in 52 BC and was a battle between the Romans under Julius Caesar and the Gauls under Vercingetorix. Caesar had been Caesar's famous conquest of Gaul. Gaul is roughly modern France and Belgium. Caesar's conquest of Gaul was kind of a slow start and stop affair. It was also an incredibly bloody, awful affair. Literally millions of people died, and literally millions of people were thrust into slavery. It was genocide on the part of the Romans. And it took several years, in no small part because Julius Caesar was not in Gaul as a general. He was in Gaul as the governor of a small province, a small Roman province in southern Gaul. Most of Gaul was still independent and free. And as the governor, he had an army, but he was only allowed to use it in self-defense. He wasn't allowed to just be like, I'm going to go conquer some stuff, because that's not how governors work, right? Like, imagine if the governor of Florida just decided, I got a National Guard, I'm going to go conquer Cuba. Like, no, that's not how any of this works. So he had an army, but he could only use it in self-defense. So he had to kind of manufacture situations where he could get away with using his army in self-defense. Like, oh yeah, I think those guys over there might be teaming up to come attack us. Like, I better go conquer them preemptively. And so his conquest of Gaul took several years because he kept having to wait for the Gauls to do something that he could then justify as legal provocation. And the Battle of Alesia, I think, takes place in about the 7th year of the war, somewhere around in there. And by this point, the Gauls have united behind a single king. Gaul traditionally was split up into a large number of tribes and kingdoms. And Caesar's just wandering all over them, defeating them in detail, right? He'll go after one kingdom and then another, and the Gauls aren't working together. And the Gauls have finally figured out, like, okay, this guy is terrible news. He's massacring us. He's enslaving us. He's conquering us. Like, this is terrible. We're all going to work together. We're all going to unite behind this guy named Vercingetorix. And Vercingetorix was this charismatic Gaulish nobleman, a great military strategist, fully the equal of Julius Caesar in many ways. And he's actually Caesar has marched out. The very existence of a unified Gaul is a threat to Roman interests. So Caesar has marched out to fight Vercingetorix. And Vercingetorix is winning. I mean, he's kicking Julius Caesar up his ass up one side and down the other, all over Gaul. And then there's this really surprising moment where Caesar wins a minor battle that he shouldn't have won. And it's a surprise to both Vercingetorix and to Caesar that Caesar kind of happened to win this battle. And it throws everything on its head. The Gauls have to retreat. They have to pull back. Caesar, who is a brilliant military mind, he presses his advantage. He doesn't let the Gauls get away. And the Gauls wind up having to retreat back to this fortified Gaulish city called Alesia. They retreat back behind the city walls, and Caesar does what he does best. He builds a wall around the city. Caesar, whenever possible, he never wants to fight the enemy in open battle. He wants to use masterful Roman engineering to win the battle before it starts. So you got all these Gauls who are in the city, behind the city walls, and Caesar just goes ahead and builds a wall around the wall, what's called a circumvallation. The idea being, great, now the Gauls are stuck in there. They can't get out, and if they want to sortie and attack the Romans, they're going to have to go up against this wall, and that's going to be hard, and that's going to be difficult to deal with. But Caesar knows that Vercingetorix has sent envoys to various Gaulish principalities and chiefdoms, saying, we need help. Like, please send anything you got. You got to get us out of here, otherwise Gaul is certainly doomed. And so Caesar knows that he's going to have to deal with the Gaulish army inside Alesia, but also a Gaulish relief army that's going to march on Caesar's rear. So Caesar then goes ahead and builds another wall around his first wall called a contravallation. So Caesar's troops are now in kind of this donut. You have Alesia. Picture a donut with a P in the middle of the donut hole. So Alesia, the walled city of Alesia, is the P. And then you have these two walls representing the inner and outer edges of the donut. And Caesar's forces are in the bread of the donut. So that when the Gaulish relief army arrives, they will also have to attack against a wall. Things are looking really dire. It's not necessarily clear that the relief army is going to get to Alesia before the Gauls in Alesia run out of food. So Vercingetorix does something. He makes a hard call, and Jesus, it's pretty monstrous. He gets all his forces together, and he gets with the town elders, and he says, look, we've only got so much food in this town. We have enough food to keep the army alive until the relief army gets here. But we don't have enough food to keep both the army alive and the townspeople alive. So all you townspeople, whose town it is, whose walls we are sheltering behind, thank you very much for letting us into your city. Get the hell out of this city. Get out. We can't afford to feed you anymore. this is a sacrifice you must make for Gaulish freedom and Gaulish independence. And the people of Alesia are driven out of the city by Vercingetorix's army. And they get to the Roman wall, the circumvallation, and say, can you please let us through? There's no food in here. Like, we're all going to die. We're non-combatants. And Caesar says, hell no. I'm not going to let you guys through. The whole point of a siege is that I'm trying to starve out my enemies. I'm not going to let you through and relieve that pressure on Alesia's food supply. You're not going anywhere. So now all of the Gaulish civilians are trapped between the walls of their own city and the walls of the besieging Romans. Vercingetorix won't let them back into the town. Caesar won't let them through his lines, and they just starve to death. Like, the entire population of Alesia starves to death on the plain outside their own city. Eventually, the Gaulish relief army arrives. The Gauls inside Alesia sortie. They both attack the Roman walls at the same time to kind of split the Roman effort. It is a very close-fought thing. Caesar wins by the skin of his teeth, and the dream of Gaulish freedom and independence effectively dies at Alesia. Caesar wins. Vercingetorix is captured. All of the surviving all of the Gauls who are combatants are either slain or the survivors are enslaved. And it is a great a historic victory for Caesar, and just the death of French independence until the fall of the Roman Empire. Great, that is a lot of lead up.
Yes, that is a lot.
From a gaming context, I'm doing a series on the blog on ways to use small incidents in larger battles to make larger battles fun. That is not what I'm going to talk about here. I am not actually interested in the Battle of Alesia as a battle, like something for your PCs to fight in.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm interested in is the siege works that are left behind. Because eventually the Romans leave, right? Like, okay, we've won the battle, like, let's get out of here. They don't take the time to tear down their fortifications first. And the empty city of Alesia, its walls haven't gone anywhere. So now you have these 3 rings of walls, one inside another, and then a ruined, abandoned city inside the innermost ring. That is an amazing adventure site. I mean, that's absolutely nuts. I flesh out in my post on Alesia a story that you can use involving a necromancer who's holed up inside Alesia, because, boy, there are a lot of corpses and skeletons that a necromancer can raise from the dead. But even if you don't use the necromancer angle, which I encourage you to use, but even if you don't use that, the physical remains of the defenses make any adventure in and around the ruins of Alesia fundamentally different and unique and memorable. So let's talk about these defenses. We'll talk about them from the outside in. So if you are walking towards Alesia, the first wall you come across is Caesar's contravallation, the wall designed to keep the Gaulish relief army out. And it's not just a wall. It has defense in depth. It has a series of defenses before you even get to the wall. So the first thing you come across is a trench that is 20 feet wide, 9 feet deep, and has vertical walls. If you come to these adventures, the site after the battle, at the bottom of the trench, you're going to have a layer of bones and armor and weapons that could still be dangerous depending on how long it's been. So you got to get down into the trench, you got to get across all this damaging stuff, then you got to get back up out of the trench. And if you're going with the necromancer angle, the idea that there is a bunch of undead inside Alesia, if you're in the trench and you stumble and fall and you land amid all of the weapons and armor, it sets up a huge clatter, right? This is an alarm bell. This is something where if you mess up getting through this trench, you've notified everybody inside the city and in the battlefield, all those undead, hey, there's somebody coming. So that's probably a thing best to avoid. If your players are smart, they may realize that the Gaulish armies made it into Caesar's camp, right? Like the battle was a very close run affair. Caesar very nearly lost. which means the Gaulish army, the relief army, must have gotten across this trench somewhere, right? There must be a place where the trench has been successfully filled in. And there are actually several places where the trench was filled in. And if you walk up and down this trench, the whole affair, like these walls are miles and miles and miles in circumference.
Yeah.
But if you walk along the trench long enough, you will find a place where the Gaulish relief army successfully filled in the trench. You can just walk right across it. Don't have to worry about all the danger and the alarm bell and the whatever. Mm-hmm. But you got to be smart enough to think about that.
Yeah.
Your next layer of defenses are, before you get to the contravallation, are the spurs. These are pegs, buried pegs in holes with iron hooks pointing down. And the idea is they were buried, but they were buried in very loose earth. And a Gaulish soldier would step in the earth, his foot would sink down, and then when he tries to pull his foot out, it catches on the iron hook. Bad news bears, he's now stuck. He can be fired upon with javelins and slingstones by the Romans from behind the wall. And honestly, just tetanus is a thing, man. Like you don't want to have to deal with that. After that, you have what the Romans called their lilies, because they had kind of a sick sense of humor, which are pits filled with upward pointing spikes. These are not Vietnam War era like punji sticks. These spikes were each spike was a log as thick as your thigh, all pointed upwards. So don't fall in any of them. And made more difficult by the fact that the Romans covered these pits with twigs and brush to hide them. Again, just like the trench, there must be places where the Gauls broke through, where these lilies have been dealt with, probably where enough Gauls fell in the pits that the pits are now full up. So if you just walk up and down the line long enough, you will find a place where people broke through. Finally, you reach the wall itself. Oh, excuse me. One thing I forgot, which is the grave markers. These are 5-foot deep trenches lined with sharpened stakes. And then you have 2 15-foot wide trenches, one of which was originally filled with water. Finally, you have the wall. You've finally come to the wall.
I know when I read Caesar's Gallic War, well, it's been a long time now since I read it, it blew my mind that, yes, we just got to the wall. We're just getting to the wall. It just blew my mind of how many defenses they had. And I'm doing this from memory, but I'm thinking it was like 14 miles or something around. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
To be fair, the Romans had some amount of time measured in months in order to get everything ready. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, the Roman siege works are just incredible. Like, this is what these guys did all day, every day. Mm-hmm. Which as a veteran, I recognize a fair fight is a tactical error. You never, ever, ever want to fight fair, because that's how you get people killed. And the Romans had no interest in fighting fair. Their biggest advantage, other than logistics and morale and training, so one of their biggest advantages was their ability to just throw up incredible feats of civil engineering whenever and wherever they felt like it. And they were totally doing that here. Mm-hmm. So you finally get to the wall. The wall is a wooden palisade built on top of an earthen berm. And even the wall is booby-trapped with these things called elks, which are horizontal beams sticking out of the wall and then studded with long spikes. So cool, you have to get past, climb over the wall without impaling yourself on one of these so-called elks. You're over the wall. You are now in the space between the walls. Again, the Gauls had to have gotten through the wall somewhere. So if you just walk up and down the wall long enough, you will eventually come to a place where the wall was breached. And probably in that place, if you turn around and look behind you, you will see that every line of defense behind you was also breached and dealt with, right? Like, this is a spot where everybody managed to get all the way through. And now you're in the space between the walls. Well, of course, the space between the walls isn't booby-trapped, because that's where the Roman army was encamped. You don't booby-trap where you sleep. But that's where the fiercest fighting of the entire battle was located. So if you're playing this as a fantasy campaign, and if you are using undead, this is an area that is full of undead. And if the necromancer has any sense, This is where he's going to congregate his undead so that your dumb skeletons and zombies don't accidentally stumble into one of the booby traps, because this area is also safe. Plus, you're going to have the remnants of Roman ballistae and catapults. You might have the remnants of some Gaulish chariots in here. Like, boy, there's going to be a lot of undead in here. This might be a great place to sneak through, or just fight your way through as fast as you can if sneaking is not an option. I will spare you, the listener at home, the list of defenses on the inward-facing wall, because it's the same as the defenses from the outward-facing wall. On the bright side, if you find a place where the wall was breached on the inward-facing wall, you then have a straight shot through all the defenses on the way out, because in order to have breached the inward-facing wall at that point, the Gaulish army in Alesia would first have to have dealt with the trenches, dealt with the grave markers, dealt with this, dealt with that. Like, there should be a straight run. And then you are in the plain between Caesar's walls and the city walls of Alesia, which is where all those people starve to death. And if you are playing in a fantasy campaign, there is no way that those guys aren't still around kicking as angry ghosts, right? They're going to be furious. They're going to be furious with the Romans for choosing to let them starve to death, even when it was clear that Vercingetorix was not going to let them back into the city. They're going to be furious with Vercingetorix and the Gauls for kicking them out of their own city after they were generous enough to let Vercingetorix come into their city with his army and thereby bring the wrath of the Roman army down upon them. Like, these guys are not going to be happy. How you want to play this is up to you. I think that it's a great opportunity for a role-play encounter. You've just had potentially a lot of combat, a lot of obstacle course stuff, a lot of skill rolls. Great opportunity for change of pace with some role-play with these guys who are going to be absolutely livid. And then finally you come to the city of Alesia, which is a ruined city. The wall is, I believe the wall is breached in a few places. Win, lose, draw, even if the wall isn't breached, like, the gate is still going to be up and open. And it's got all these ruined buildings inside. If you're playing this with a necromancer, the necromancer is probably holed up somewhere in the city. You may have to find him. This may be where the nastiest undead are, the necromancer created through his experimentation. I went ahead and threw in some story for the necromancer, basing him on a real historical figure, Diviciacus, who was a Gaulish druid, member of the Gaulish religious caste, who is the only druid whose name we know, whose name made it into a historical text. But Diviciacus wound up siding with the Romans. Diviciacus kind of sold out his own people, sided with Caesar, and you could definitely see the possibility of this guy, looking back on the situation at the end of his life and saying, oh my God, what have I done? Look at what the people that I backed wrought upon my people, and returning to the site of ultimate Gaulish downfall, and trying to make something right, trying to raise a giant army, trying to find some way to undo the horror that he may feel he contributed to. This is long. This is a lot of explanation. I apologize to it, but yeah, that's basically the long and the short of it. Emphasis on long of the Alesia and how I would recommend it be used at the gaming table.
Kind of the way you present it, it does provide a very fascinating location for a campaign, because the way the different defenses are set and the amount of walls and the different layers of the different armies and the townspeople and everything. We did spend some time on fantasy. Well, what about a science fiction campaign?
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
So the reason I focused on fantasy is of course that for me, the biggest advantages of Alesia as an adventure site are the physical fortifications and the corpses, sure. Both of which are much less relevant in a science fiction campaign. Now, in a science fiction campaign, you can totally do it as a ground-based siege, something 40K style or StarCraft style, where you've got a big, giant siege machines, in place of the walls, because walls and berms are much less useful in the era of high explosives. In place of walls, you might have inadvertent defenses, deliberate defenses like mines or laser tripwires or things left behind, but also things like craters full of radioactive ooze or damaged AI-controlled robot combatants that were not taken off the battlefield and nobody ever bothered to switch out of kill mode. They're just sort of rusting there by the side, but the arm with the gun attached to it still works. And rusting battle tanks whose fusion cores are unstable and may explode if jostled wrong. You can definitely do stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The corpses are less useful, even in a science fantasy campaign, a la 40K or Star Wars or what have you. Necromancy is usually a thematic no-no.
But unless it's a scientific kind of reanimation, I guess.
Oh yeah,
kind of like universal soldier kind of thing.
Yes, we're gonna hand wave it. Oh, it was the psychics that reanimated the corpse.
Well, like a scientific kind of reanimation, kind of like scientific zombies, kind of like I don't know if Universal Soldier or Silent Rage with Chuck Norris, kind of like a scientific zombie kind of thing.
I don't know either of these, unfortunately.
Oh, well, that's a shame.
I may be showing my youth here.
I may be showing my age, so that's but I think those are all kind of interesting things. I was also thinking you could go science fiction if you went a smaller scale and say it was just like the city of Alesia could be like a small outpost from the high tech kind of science fiction, and then low tech tribes or something had kind of maybe fled there, and then their enemies had surrounded them, and so the high tech outpost was just overrun because they just couldn't combat the numbers, and then now a ship or something is coming and is surveying the ruins of this thing, and they're exploring kind of the ruins of this battle, trying to get to that outpost for some reason.
Yes, you could definitely do that. You would want to throw in some justification for why the PCs can't just fly over the battlefield, but sure. Cool, that's easily done. One of the anti-aircraft gun robots is still active and will shoot at anything that flies near. Sure. There's some sort of weird colored energy field, a la TNG. Yeah. You just need to invent some excuse.
Yeah, I think it provides some great ideas and foundations, and your fantasy necromancer idea is probably just spot on, because I don't know any role players who would not love kind of tramping through something like that. But Tristan, we have been talking a while today, so I just want to thank you for being on the show. Again, I will link up your blog and your podcast in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. And I hope that we have provided these 3 historical topics that some game masters and role players out there can take and use some of these great ideas at the table.
My pleasure. I just hope the listeners at home, had a good time and maybe got something out of it for their campaigns.
Well, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this discussion today with Tristan. I hope that you found some of these different historical topics and ideas that we had useful in your campaigns. As I mentioned, Tristan was on episode 5 of the podcast, so I will put a link to that episode where he kind of introduces the whole idea of using history in tabletop RPGs. I will put a link to that episode in the show notes for this episode, so you can check that out. Also, I will provide links to Tristan's blog and his new podcast, as well as some of his books. So you can find those show notes at dicegeeks.com. Now, if you enjoy this show, guys, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting me on Patreon. You can head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks and check out the different support levels there. Any bit of support on Patreon goes to helping me make this show better and better. And it also just gives me the confidence to know that there are people out there who want me to continue making this show. If you want something for free, you can head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get 10 free dungeon maps plus some other RPG resources that you can use in your campaigns. And as a bonus, you will never miss an episode of this show. So I thank you for listening. And until next time, keep gaming.